Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, I wanted to talk a bit about Snowguard. Snowguard is a card that went kind of from zero to hero recently, going from one of the worst and least played / lowest win rate cards in the game to now being a core part of a very top tier deck and arguably one of the best one drops in the game. Snowguard is also going to be available in this upcoming week's Spotlight caches. If you haven't seen the video I put out recently going over the best weeks for the month of September, definitely recommend checking that out. But TLDR is that I think the next week is going to be one of, if not the best week to be opening up if you want at least 2 out of the 3 things there, including Alioth, Hitmonkey, and Snowguard. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this card, why it was so bad initially, how it got better, and share some lists I really enjoyed playing with it recently. So to start, why was Snowguard such a bad card when it came out? This card was relentlessly memed on after its release, and I can't count the amount of posts I saw of people opening it in the old collection cache system and being kind of sad they didn't get any other Series 4 card. I was one of those people too. I opened Snowguard when I was going for Spider-Ham back when that came out, and I was pretty disappointed and really didn't use the card very much out of a brief attempt in a zoo-style deck. So why exactly was Snowguard so bad? Well, the main reason it came down to was actually RNG of how the card worked with its transformation. Originally, how Snowguard worked is when you drew the card, it would immediately transform into the hawk form, and then the following turn it would transform into bear and rotate back and forth between the turns. This RNG was such a huge downside to the card. If you played with or against this card recently, you might have noticed that the effects on the hawk and the bear are actually fairly powerful. As we've seen with Legion recently, being able to interact with locations in ways your opponent might not expect can actually be really huge to getting larger cube gains on the ladder. But the RNG that existed within Snowguard made it hard to time when you were going to be able to get down that hawk or that bear right when you needed it. Something I didn't even realize until I was playing the card was it's not a specific form on a specific turn, as if you draw Snowguard on turn 1, it'll start as the hawk, then turn into the bear on 2, hawk on 3. But if you draw it on turn 2, it'll start as the hawk on turn 2, and the order will be different than if you had it on turn 1. And that made it really hard to consistently be able to play this card on a specific turn. In terms of the effects of the cards, I think the hawk is the more impactful of the bunch, as ignoring all location abilities until the end of next turn is a really strong effect. There is a little confusion about how this effect works. For example, things like the Nexus, it's only turning it off temporarily. That's why they say, or at the end of the game. I know that is still a little confusing because a lot of people don't expect Nexus or some of the negative zone locations that reduce power to actually be persisting at the end of the game, but all location effects do come back at the very end. This is just preventing that until the end of the game triggers start to happen. Being able to shut off all location abilities for essentially 2 turns, because this includes both the turn you play it and the turn afterwards, is pretty strong. I've been playing a lot of this card recently, and that has definitely been the more impactful of the 2 forms for me. I think the most notable way I've seen this be impactful is with shutting down Limbo, as if you play this on turn 5 going into turn 6, or if you just play it as a surprise on turn 6 itself, Limbo, while still existing, will not be activated and the game will actually end on turn 6. So in a way, it acts a lot like that Scarlet Witch without having to worry about that random location RNG potentially backfiring on you. The other way I really like this is for shutting off locations that can have a poor effect on our game plan. For example, the locations that move things around the board, or maybe there's a location that our opponent is able to leverage better than us, like a Death's Domain or something, and they're a destroy deck. So sometimes being able to just temporarily turn off that location can actually totally flip the game on its head. And since this card is still kind of a newer thing people aren't used to playing around, I find even though it's a little telegraphed here, because now you have to play Snowguard to get the hawk and the bear forms, a lot of players don't seem to actually play around those cards because they're not used to seeing them. Perhaps that will change with time, but for now, people just don't seem to be respecting the impact that the hawk and the bear can make when they come down later in the game. And then the bear form is a bit less impactful generally than the hawk form. However, I do think it leads to more swingier interactions on the right location. One thing that's important to note about this one is it will not be re-triggering locations that have a effect that goes off on a specific turn. So for example, if you have something like Asgard or Adelon and those effects have already gone off, or even if they haven't gone off yet, if it's too early or too late in the game, this bear will not be re-triggering that effect as it is conditional to that specific turn. However, there are a handful of locations that the bear can actually be very good with. I know for me, some of the ones that have really stuck out have been the Savage Land location, as well as Central Park. Being able to just surprisingly fill your opponent's board with more raptors or more squirrels can actually just totally lock down a lane, which can be very effective. And like I mentioned previously, you'd think opponents would be playing around this after they've seen you play the initial Snowguard, but that just doesn't seem to happen very much in my experience. The other obvious reason why this Snowguard buff has been huge is because now we have a 1-drop that generates us 2 cards. It goes without saying, this is insanely powerful with things like the Collector and Loki, as both those cards really care about card generation, and we don't exactly have a ton of cards in Marvel Snap that actually go positive on generating cards, so generating more than it costs to play them. Coulson is the next highest cost one, and he's a 3-cost card, and the difference between 1 and 3 is absolutely gigantic. This also gets a little silly in Loki mirrors, as if you generate a Snowguard from your opponent's deck with your Loki, it'll actually be free, so even if you can't or don't have time to get value out of the 2 forms, you can still use it to pump up your hand for more power on that Collector. Another thing that I think is kind of an underrated interaction with this card is this card lets you kind of supplement your early game a lot better in decks that typically run a bit higher of a curve. Like, for example, I've been playing a on-reveal deck recently that I've been having a lot of fun with, and Snowguard has been really great because that deck didn't really want to run a ton of 1 or 2 drops. However, with running things like Ironheart, I do want to actually be able to play a decent amount of cards on the board so I can get the most efficient use out of her buff. Snowguard's been really nice for this, as it only takes up 1 slot in my deck, but it's giving me not only a 1-drop I can play on turn 1 or turn 2, but more 2-drops I have that I can weave into my curve later on. And before we close it out here, I do want to show off some decks I really enjoyed with Snowguard. Obviously, this deck right here is one that probably will not take people by surprise. Loki is really, really crazy with card generation, and given Snowguard is one of the best ways to generate cards at an efficient mana cost, no surprise she is going to be making a very large impact in this style of deck. There are a lot of different ways you can build a deck like this. People are going to have different personal preferences, and for the most part, I think you can actually sub out some of the Series 4 and 5 cards here without the deck actually being much worse, such as Barrage and Jeff. I do think Kitty is a very core part of it due to just the synergy with things like Collector and Angela, and Snowguard is a really, really powerful addition if you have her. But aside from those two and Loki being a season pass card, all the other cards here are fairly budget, and I think that's one of the better things about Loki. You can actually build rather effective Loki decks on a pretty decent budget. Not too much to say about the game plan. If you played ladder at all since the season started, you probably know how this deck works, but the general concept is we're trying to generate cards in the early game, pump up that Collector, get a nice big hand size, and play Loki on turn 4 or turn 5 usually, so that we can get cards from the opponent. Hopefully we have a Quinjet down so we get even more cost reduction, and we generally close out the game using the opponent's cards generated with Loki and our big Collector, or sometimes we just play the cards we've got off our generation from Snowguard, Cable, Mirage, Coulson, and even Moongirl. Moongirl is actually a card I think people are sleeping on a bit in a list like this, as being able to double up on Lokis or double up on Collectors can be really, really busted. And she's rather efficient card generation for the cost as long as you have at least 3 cards in hand. The next deck here is one that I think is probably flying under the radar right now, but is really fun and surprisingly effective to play. I'll actually be streaming this one today, so if you want to catch some gameplay with it live, definitely check out the link in the description below to the stream. But this is a on-reveal focused deck. You know, everyone's played on-reveal decks when they first started Marvel Snap using things like Odin and White Tiger to just get a bunch of stuff on the board, and I think they're actually a lot of fun, but people kind of forget about them when they get in the later collection levels. When you get Wong, sometimes people finally break it back out, as Wong enables even more powerful synergies. However, the Wong on-reveal archetype was usually at a bit of a disadvantage because of how telegraphed and counterable it was with things like Cosmo. But recently, and especially with the addition of Loki, there seems to be a lot less Cosmo going around in the meta. I haven't really seen very much of it at all, and oftentimes opponents are playing that Cosmo earlier on in the game, or they're playing it when they see your Wong, so you know you can get out for less cube. But it really hasn't been too big of an issue for me. Echo's another card that you could consider in this deck if you want a bit of added protection to your Wong. I don't own Echo, and personally I haven't really missed it, but if you really want that extra insurance, maybe it's worth adding here. I think a lot of people underestimate the power output this deck has too, as a lot of people I think see an on-reveal focused deck and assume it really can't output a crazy amount of power, but combining Wong with Odin and our powerful on-reveal effects like Ironheart and White Tiger really just allows for us to spread a whole ton of power across the board. Zabu's been rather good in this shell as we have some pretty impactful 4-drops here. Jubilee's nice. Not only does it have synergy with Wong, it lets us get into some locations that are otherwise tricky to get into. And on top of that, we have a high roll available where Jubilee can roll into Odin, which will re-trigger the Jubilee and pull out another card from the deck. Iron Lad has been really nice here as a way to double up on our powerful on-reveal effects, or just be a Hail Mary for Odin if we didn't happen to draw it by the final turn of the game. I think the vast majority of hits in this deck are just really strong with Iron Lad, so the card definitely earns his spot. Gamora is more of a flex spot here, but I've definitely liked her for being able to go tall on occasion. It's the only card we have in this deck that's actually generally vulnerable to Shang-Chi, so you will want to keep that in mind a little bit, especially against Loki opponents who could potentially copy our Shang-Chi. But Shang-Chi has been really nice in this deck as I felt like we needed a way to equalize bigger threats from the opponents, such as collectors that are getting out of hand, Devil Dinos, just any of the other big stuff going around, Evolved Hulks. Just having that as a way to clear out a lane that the opponent is expecting to win can be really nice. And with Zabu being able to play Shang-Chi alongside something like Jubilee or Lad, or even just Ironheart on the final turn can be enough to swing the game in our favor. Iceman gives us some good early interaction. Jeff lets us spread the power around. Ironheart is a card I think a lot of people sleep on. We're able to get a decent amount of cards spread out on the board, and getting that Ironheart down in a Wong lane and following up with Odin ends up being a pretty absurd amount of power. And then Snowguard has been really nice for the location control element and help guarantee that we actually have a decent amount of cards to play in the early game when we miss on drawing our other 2-drops like Zabu or Jeff. This deck's a ton of fun, and I found it to be surprisingly effective at climbing. So if you have some nostalgia for that early on-reveal archetype and you want to take it for a spin again, I would definitely suggest trying this one out. Overall, I think it's really great they found a way to actually make this card playable, and not just playable, but feel good and fun to use. And another really nice bonus is now you can see some of the really nice variants that are available for the card, because it's not always going to be transformed as soon as it makes its way into your hand. Overall, I think this is a card a lot of people are going to have a ton of fun playing with. I think it's actually going to explode in popularity when more players get access to it with this upcoming week of Spotlight caches. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts on Snowguard. I'd love to hear what you think about this card. Are you excited for it? Do you like the changes around it? I honestly think this might be like the gold standard of turning a really bad card into a fun, interesting, useful card. Obviously, the timing with Loki come out is giving it extra use, but I think this card still would have been really good even aside from the powerful synergies it has with the Loki decks. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and what other really bad card would you like to see get a similar buff as this one did? We've seen from the developers in the past that they want to make Spotlight caches more enticing to open, so it's definitely in their best interest to make bad cards like Snowguard more appealing, so that way the Spotlight caches feel more like a win when you open it, rather than a low roll of RNG. I know for me personally, Spider-Man 2099 is a card I'd really like to see them buff in some way, as I think the effect is cool, interesting, thematic, but just not really powerful enough to warrant seeing play, even in decks that you would think he'd make a lot of sense in, like move-focused archetypes. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.